We are at that point where rankings are constantly being updated because of daily fantasy news. And I'm going to go through the top 40 running back rankings for 2025 fantasy football today. And I am so excited about the season starting. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support if you are just as excited as I am. Now, I'll keep the first tier brief because nothing has changed but between the top 3 running backs with Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Jahmyr Gibbs. They're in the exact same order, but I would say the way I would break it down to you to be easy is that I think Bijan Robinson has a 50% chance to finish as the running back 1. And I would say Saquon and Jahmyr Gibbs, they both have a 25% chance of finishing as the RB1. So this is the tier where I think all these guys have the equal opportunity to finish as the RB1. Bijan Robinson, I love the age. The guy's basically been indestructible his whole career. His offensive line is still really good in Atlanta. Philadelphia with Saquon Barkley, it's the best offensive line in football. The only concern I've highlighted all offseason about running backs with 350 plus touches, and the following season what happens to them. Saquon Barkley had an enormous amount of touches last year, playoffs included, so I do fear Saquon Barkley getting injured or losing touches per game. That's why he's at 2. But with Jahmyr Gibbs at 3, honestly, they're like neck and neck. Like, you could re-rank Jahmyr Gibbs above Saquon if you want to. I'm just giving a little bit more respect to Saquon's offensive line. Now that Jahmyr Gibbs does have a center that is not Frank Ragnow, I think that impacts a little bit, but not too much, because I think Jahmyr Gibbs is an elite talent as well. I just don't necessarily feel like I could see him doing 350 plus touches and being okay at his size. Dropping down to our next tier, Josh Jacobs still at 4, Christian McCaffrey still at 5. Josh Jacobs I've been well over consensus on all offseason long. This shouldn't surprise anybody who's been with me all offseason. I've been big on Josh Jacobs, and if you're new here, explain to me why I shouldn't be. He's a workhorse running back on a really good offense, top 10, with a top 10 offensive line and a great quarterback and a great offensive-minded head coach with no clear backup as well. So explain to me what your issue is with Josh Jacobs, because every time someone gripes at me for having Josh Jacobs ranked here, all the while they still can't tell me why he shouldn't be ranked here. So yeah, he's going to continue to be at 4. And McCaffrey at 5. Listen, he's the only guy in this tier who I know has RB1 upside. I think all the other guys are top 3 upside at best. But with McCaffrey, he's the only guy that I think has number 1 upside, but I don't feel comfortable putting him in tier 1. This is a risk-reward thing. Now, at his range in drafts, I think it's a worthy move to go grab Christian McCaffrey because he is going to be a guy that wins you a league if he hits. But if he doesn't hit, there's no coming back from it because he will be a complete disaster if he ends up getting injured or just loses a step this year. It's the riskiest pick in all of fantasy football. This pick right here determines your risk reward and how risk tolerant you are as a fantasy manager. Me personally, I'm a risk taker. I'll put Christian McCaffrey at 5 over Ashton Genty and Devon Achane. Look, the thing that I've heard about Ashton Genty, and people who always say to me, why isn't Achane ranked over Genty? Listen, people always cite that Genty's going to be on a bad team behind a bad offensive line. Devon Achane's going to have the same problem. His offensive line might actually be a little worse. And honestly, I think Miami as a team could be worse or just as bad. And I think the Raiders will have some fight in them this year. I think Ashton Genty, without question, gets 350 plus touches in this offense this year and just isn't that efficient. I always compare his rookie year to what Najee Harris's rookie year looked like in 2021. Heavy volume, but low in efficiency. I think that's what Genty gets. And Achane, again, I think Achane's the better player than Ashton Genty right now. He's an extreme talent, and I think that he will get the majority out of the backfield. And as well, he's not going to miss week 1, according to new reports. But Achane, again, I've got issues with this guy's offensive line and a lot of issues with this guy's team as well. So he's at just the same disadvantages as Ashton Genty to me. It's just that people don't want to acknowledge it for some reason with Miami. Dropping now to our next tier, I've got Derrick Henry at 8, and Chase Brown actually popped back up at 9. Now, with Derrick Henry, it's a very Christian McCaffrey type of risk, in my opinion, and nobody wants to acknowledge it. Every time I bring it up, I get yelled at, and everybody acts like I've just committed a robbery or something. Derrick Henry is old. He will get taken by Father Time at some point. It's the fact of the NFL. So I know it's unpopular to acknowledge that, but it's also arrogant to not acknowledge that. Derrick Henry could fall off this year. Now, there's no indication that he will based on last year's play, but it happens really quick. So Derrick Henry I view as just as risky of a pick as McCaffrey. A little less risky just because you can get him a little bit later. But obviously if Henry hits, he's too low in these rankings as well. And I acknowledge that. Chase Brown at 9. He did end up climbing back over Kyren Williams. I've just been pinballing these two back and forth, and I feel like I'm going to keep it here. Chase Brown, even though I'm worried about the 3-down back potential, and I think that they've made moves to not have him be the 3-down back, I still do view him as just a great talent on a great offense. So even if he doesn't get as many targets out of the backfield as we would like, or as many carries on third downs as we would like, for example, I do still think that Chase Brown, just with his efficiency being off the charts, I think he will still be a top 10 guy. And I think Kyren will be as well. But the reason I put Kyren below him is because that 350 plus touch back research I was talking about with Saquon, well, it also applies to Kyren. He had 350 plus touches last year in 2024. And he's a smaller guy. So I think that he's just as risky to get injured as Saquon. It's just the price on this guy is so awesome. And I do think that as long as he's healthy and as long as Matt Stafford's healthy, this is not even his ceiling. I think he's got a top 7, top 6 ceiling. But I think that this year there's a little bit of hesitation to make him a complete 3-down back. Now, Jonathan Taylor's at 11, and Amarian Hampton's at 12 to round out this tier. Jonathan Taylor, my issues have always been with the offense in general, and just how I think they're not going to move the ball that effectively with Daniel Jones or with Anthony Richardson. But the one good thing that we did get from the Daniel Jones move is that I believe that increases his targets on a per-game basis. I also think that increases his likelihood to carry the ball at the red zone in all likelihood. I think that there was a lot of good things for the Daniel Jones move that highlights Jonathan Taylor better than it would have if Anthony Richardson was the guy. But I think nonetheless, the offense will ride on Jonathan Taylor. It makes me a little worried, but at the same time, Jonathan Taylor I still think is a really good pick. Amarian Hampton, I'm just ready to commit to the guy. Like, I've had him here for weeks now, and he's not going to move. Like, the news about Najee Harris maybe being ready for week 1 has no effect on me at this point. Najee Harris will be the RB2 at best. I mean, we're talking at best. Like, I'm not even saying that he's going to get 10-plus touches in a game anymore. I think that ship has sailed. I think Hampton doesn't look back. He gets the opportunity week 1 and just jet sets off into the sunset without Najee Harris ever coming back. So I've got Amarian Hampton still at 12 inside of this really good tier right here, with all these guys having top 5 potential, except Henry, who I think has top 3. Dropping down to our next tier, Bucky Irving at 13, James Cook at 14. With Bucky Irving, I did move him back up over James Cook. And the reason is because Rachaad White is still injured, still going through that injury. But I still do have the same issues, which is that this offensive coordinator seems to like Rachaad White. He's talked about him being one of the best, if not the best, receiving backs in the NFL. I mean, you just can't ignore that kind of stuff when you're talking about a running back with day 3 draft capital, wasn't drafted by the offensive coordinator, and doesn't have too much capital attached to his name within the organization. I know he was great last year, and I like him a lot, but you have to acknowledge that, and a lot of people just don't like acknowledging that. With James Cook, he doesn't have that problem. Ray Davis may come in on third down sometimes, but the one thing that I like about Cook is that I think his red zone work is really set in stone. Now, I think it's really hard to repeat a 16 touchdown season like he had last year. But at the same time, like, the amount of red zone usage that he gets and his effectiveness in it is the reason they signed him to that deal that they signed him to a couple weeks ago. So I think that that's untouched, and I still think he could get 10-plus touchdowns in a season. Kenneth Walker at 15 and Travion Henderson at 16. Now, with Kenneth Walker, I've made this very clear throughout the offseason. I truly believe as long as KW is healthy, he has top 5 upside. I'm not joking when I say that. Clint Kubiak loves Kenneth Walker. This offensive coordinator raved about him from day 1, said that we plan to use this guy a ton. So I believe that as long as he's healthy, he's a 3-down back for them. Not even joking. But obviously we can't count on him being there for all 17 games because he rarely is. So Kenneth Walker, you have to factor in that injury likelihood that he has always dealt with throughout his career. And that's why I've got him at 15 and not higher, to be honest. But with TreVeyon Henderson, I will say this. The last time I did these rankings, I did talk about how I think we're getting closer and closer to TreVeyon's ceiling. Well, I feel that way even more so today. Not that I don't like TreVeyon. I hate being the wet blanket on this one because I really like him. In New England, I think it's a great fit. Josh McDaniel will use this guy all day long in the passing game. And I don't think it will take long, if at all, for him to be the lead rushing back in this offense as well. But again, it is still the Patriots offense. They still have a bad offensive line. Josh McDaniels is still the offensive coordinator, and Ramondre is still there making money. So you can't ignore all those factors. I think TreVeyon Henderson's ceiling is probably close to top 12, but I'm not there yet with him in my rankings for sure. And then Breece Hall at 17 to round out this tier. Listen, he's going to stay here only because I love the talent. The concern I had all offseason got confirmed in the preseason, which is that they plan to use a 2 or sometimes 3-headed running back monster. So they are not respecting him as a talent, as I think they should. I still think Breece Hall is an elite talent at the running back position in the NFL, but they're not viewing him as that. So you have to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I'd rather have him over a guy like in the next tier when we go down and see Chuba Hubbard and Alvin Kamara at 19. Chuba Hubbard, I just don't think has Breece's talent. And I also think it's worth noting that Rico Dowdle had third down snaps in the preseason with the ones. So I think that Chuba Hubbard is not exactly safe to retain a third down role because of the fact that he's not a pass catcher and Rico Dowdle is. So I think Chuba is still obviously the lead back. I think he gets the red zone work and I think he's still good this year, but I think we kind of hit his ceiling last year when there was realistically no real backup behind him, whereas this year they've got Rico Dowdle. And then Alvin Kamara, it's just an age problem. Like, this is similar to Mike Evans to me, where I know that if Alvin Kamara is healthy and he's out there, I know Alvin Kamara has top 10 back upside at this point. At this point in his career, it's still the same story. The problem I have with Kamara, guys, is that it is irresponsible of me to not acknowledge that this guy has a pretty high likelihood, I would say, of getting hurt. I mean, he has been dealing with injuries the last several years of his career, and this whole offense freaking rides on him. They can't afford to use anybody else in this offense. He's their best guy by far and away offensive talent-wise. So they will ride him like a show pony into the ground, and that's when he gets hurt. So I'm just saying that. I think his per-game metrics will be awesome again, but I think that you have to bake in some missed time because they have no choice but to use him 20-plus times a game. And he's just at that age where it's not ideal to do that. DeAndre Swift still at 20, and I ended up moving RJ Harvey up to 21. So I want to go through him. But DeAndre Swift really quick, guys. It still blows my mind a little bit, to be honest, like how many people are not in on Swift. And listen, I acknowledge it at one point that DeAndre Swift is not a player that I particularly like. Like, I don't think he's that good of a player. But I do love Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator. The fact that he's the lead back by far in this backfield. And I also love that this offensive line is a top 5 rated offensive line according to PFF. They improved the offensive line overnight in the offseason. So Swift, everything just works for him, and it's impossible not to see him as a top 20 back. And then RJ Harvey here. This guy moved up. And it might sound weird because the other day, J.K. Dobbins was confirmed as the running back 1 on the Denver Broncos depth chart. And we also got an indication that this offense will probably lean towards J.K. in the third down role, if nothing else. So my thought on it is this. I think that it will inevitably happen that J.K. Dobbins loses a step because it's what happened last year. And he just gets tired and fatigued because of all the injuries that he's had throughout his career. Well, that's when R.J. Harvey comes in. And I want a Denver running back, bottom line, end of story. And he's just the more explosive back between the two. So I think RJ Harvey, the path is murky at first, but I think by the time we get to like October, mid-October maybe, that's when we start seeing the best of RJ Harvey. Isaiah Pacheco at 22, I'm getting more comfortable with him, and James Conner at 23. Pacheco leapfrogged a couple guys over James Conner, And the reason I'm getting more comfortable is because I watched him in the preseason very closely, because I've had an issue all offseason, which is I can't get back on board after he got injured in 2024. Well, the reality is that this guy looks much, much better than he did after the injury in this preseason. He looks like he has his explosion back to a certain extent. And they have really no clear answer behind him. I mean, Kareem Hunt will have involvement, but I still think that Isaiah Pacheco is a superior player at this point of his career, based on what I saw in the preseason. And I know I want a Chiefs running back, so that's why I'm getting more comfortable with the Pacheco. And it's kind of unfortunate because I spent all offseason avoiding him in drafts, where now I wish I would have drafted more of him. James Conner at 23. I think Conner is just in the spot where I've continued to have the same message, which is that Trey Benson, one way or the other, will end the year as this team's running back one. That is my prediction this year. I think it's either because of an injury to James Conner or because Trey Benson outplays him. Either way, all roads lead to the same thing, which is James Conner is the RB2 by the end of the year. Now, I think that the beginning of the season will be strong for Conner, but I think as the season goes on, that's when he drops to the 23 range rather than being in a top 10 to top 15 range, where I think he will be most of the first half of the season. Dropping down to our next tier, Tyrone Tracy Jr. and Tony Pollard at 25. Now, with Tyrone Tracy, this is a guy I just continue to shoot up my rankings because Cam Skattebo is the RB3 on the depth chart. He's been injured all offseason. I don't think that he's as good as everybody makes him out to be. And listen, this is a Cam Skattebo guy right here. I'm telling you, I like Cam Skattebo. I liked him a lot. But the problem that I have with everybody, I've got this problem with everybody, is that nobody acknowledges Tyrone Tracy Jr. was a wide receiver in college. All they want to do is talk about how good Cam Skattebo is out of the backfield catching passes. Well, here's a news flash for you. Tyrone Tracy Jr. was a wide receiver in college. Yeah, the guy can catch the freaking ball. So I think Tyrone Tracy Jr. still will be the lead back by all indications in this offense, and he fits a lot of breakout metrics for me personally. Now, with Tony Pollard at 25, it'd be irresponsible for me to not have him at least at 25. Tyjae Spears will miss the first 4 games in the season, and it's disappointing because I thought Tyjae Spears would have a good season this year. Well, it's starting out like every other year past. So Tony Pollard, at the very least, is necessary in this offense. I still think Tennessee's offense is not that good, so that's the reason he's down here at 25. And as well, I also don't think Tony Pollard is that great of a player either. Aaron Jones at 26 and Jordan Mason at 27 here. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, I finally just decided I got to take the leap with Mason and put him right behind Aaron Jones because I think it really will be a true split in this backfield. They did this trade and signed Jordan Mason for a specific reason, which is to limit Aaron Jones' touches, to keep him fresh all year. And the bottom line is Aaron Jones is the more explosive back between him and Jordan Mason. But he will not, I don't believe, get the red zone work and a lot of the first and second down work in between the 20s. I think Aaron Jones will be efficient on every touch, where I think Mason probably has more scoring opportunities at the goal line. But either way, they're in a great offense. I just think that both these guys have their own certain amount of upside. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Jaylen Warren at 28, Jerome Ford at 29. Now, Jaylen Warren, I made this commitment in the overall rankings I did a little over a week ago, where I said, at this point, I just have to drop Caleb Johnson. Like, he's got to drop in my rankings. This guy will not start the year. And in my opinion, by the time he does become the starter, which I think will happen, but this offense sucks anyways. This offensive line sucks. Arthur Smith sucks. The offense in general sucks. So I think Jaylen Warren, at this point, like, he's just got to be higher ranked for me because I think that this guy starts a lot of the season because they love him in Pittsburgh. And I think people are catching on to it. So I'm pulling back on my diatribes with Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson for you because I think people understand at this point that they like Jaylen Warren as well. But Jaylen Warren, to me, is just still in a bad offense in Pittsburgh, where I know that he will split time at some point with Caleb Johnson. Jerome Ford at 29. It's still really just a disaster. I mean, like, there's no other way to put this one. This offense sucks already. This offense also doesn't really want to play Jerome Ford, but they kind of don't have much choice. Now, they could easily play Dylan Sampson, who we may or may not go over towards the end of the rankings, but I will say that Dylan Sampson doesn't look like he's the favored back right now. And all I know is that if you draft Quinshon Judkins, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you cannot draft Quinshon Judkins at this point. It's a disaster. I don't know if he'll be relevant at all this year. So I think that Jerome Ford, just by default, has to be inside the top 30 because I know that he will be the lead back for the time being. J.K. Dobbins is at 30 and Nick Chubb is at 31. Again, with J.K. Dobbins, I believe that there is a lot of benefits being in a Denver backfield, with this offensive line being the number 2 rated offensive line in the NFL. And J.K. Dobbins, if he does get 15 plus touches per game for the first little bit, he will be good. It probably has a very similar start to what he had last year with the Los Angeles Chargers. But I think at some point, again, RJ Harvey will be the guy who takes over, and I don't think we have as long of that honeymoon period that we had with J.K. Dobbins last year into 2025. And Nick Chubb, this is just a weird scenario, right? Obviously, Joe Mixon is going to miss the first 4 games, but now they're saying Joe Mixon may not play at all this season. Like, they were non-committal when asked about it. So I have no idea what's really going on here and if he will play. As of right now, every indication we have is that Nick Chubb will be the starter. So theoretically, he should be higher ranked. This is just a concern for my sake of I don't think he's the same player he once was. And I think that Woody Marks will be involved to a certain extent in the passing game as well. So Nick Chubb, I think, just is limited with upside because of his own personal talent at this point and the fact that he's never been a pass catcher, and Woody Marks is a pass catcher. Trey Benson is at 32, well above consensus, and David Montgomery is at 33. Now, with Trey Benson, I love Trey Benson. He is one of my flag plants this offseason. He's my most drafted player on Underdog. And again, going back to the James Conner discussion, I believe that what they have tried to tell us all offseason will come to fruition as soon as week 1 hits. This offseason, all they have discussed is Trey Benson looks great, and he is going to be the 1B to the 1A James Conner. And then further validation was given to us in the second preseason game where they ended up resting him with the starters. So Trey Benson, I think, is just right there at the precipice of taking over for James Conner. And again, I think it will happen at some point this year. So yeah, I've got him way higher ranked than consensus. And this is a huge draft value on all platforms, by the way. And then David Montgomery is at 33. With David Montgomery, I've discussed him this offseason a couple times. I'm out on him. I think his price is just at a point where I can't invest. I think he will lose work because John Morton is not going to be as effective at utilizing 2 running backs as Ben Johnson was. That's a hard thing to do. And David Montgomery, in addition, is older, and he's also dealt with a lot of injuries in his career. So I think he becomes less efficient and gets less work. That's a recipe for disaster, but I've got him at 33 because the offense is still really strong. So if they do try to use him sparingly, I think he will have a role on fantasy teams at some points. Zach Charbonnet at 34 and Travis Etienne at 35 to round out this tier. Zach Charbonnet, going back to Kenneth Walker, right? I think Kenneth Walker will be the lead back when he is healthy. But I do think that there's a couple things that need to be nuanced conversations, right? Number one is that I believe that Kenneth Walker will miss a certain amount of games. That's when Charbonnet comes in and he's a stud, right? And then I also think that there's going to be games where Kenneth gets injured mid-game or is dealing with an injury all game, and Charbonnet comes in and takes work. So I think Charbonnet is one of the best, if not the best, insurance backs in all of fantasy, maybe behind Trey Benson. But Zach Charbonnet, to me, is still a top 36 guy because of the upside that we know we've gotten from him in the past without Kenneth Walker. And then Travis Etienne at 35 to round out this tier. Listen, we don't know what's going to go on with the Jags running backs. Apparently, they're shopping both Etienne and Tank Bigsby on the trade market. Would not be surprised if by the time you're watching this, one of them gets dealt. The way I look at it is this. I believe that if they're all on there, I think Travis Etienne will be the lead back who gets the most amount of work. I still think that he's a good pass catcher, and I still think that he is going to be efficient enough on less work this year. So couple that with an offense that I think takes a step this year in efficiency. I think Travis Etienne does have merit to be a flex play in certain weeks, particularly if we could get the role ironed out. But again, keep an eye on this one because I would not be surprised if within the next 24 hours he gets traded. I think at some point before the start of the season or maybe mid-season, we see Tank Bigsby or Travis Etienne off of the Jaguars roster. And of course, we'd have to reshuffle the rankings. Dropping down to our last tier, Bill Karofsky is at 36, and Caleb Johnson lands at 37. Bill Krosky is obviously Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, if you don't know who that is. Now, I've had questions for weeks now. What do you do with Washington running backs, right? Brian Robinson Jr. gets traded. Now we're wondering who's going to be the guy in this backfield. Well, here's my opinion on this. I think it could be very similar to what we saw in Cincinnati last year. If you recall, Cincinnati started out the year with Zach Moss as the lead back. We had seen him from times with Indianapolis be a solid back. We had never seen Chase Brown in the role that he was eventually thrust into in 2024 after Zach Moss got hurt. So I think that what happens this year is going to be this in Washington. Austin Eckler probably gets the majority of the touches in the first month. But I think over time, we see the decline of Austin Eckler, and I think Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt is the most explosive back in Washington and could take on a Chase Brown resurgence in the latter parts of the season. So I think Chase Brown is the good comp for Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. And of course, if he does do that, he's way too low ranked. But just with the uncertainty right now, I've got him at 36. And Caleb Johnson at 37. Listen, Caleb Johnson, again, I don't even know if I have to repeat it, but I guess I will. Caleb Johnson's on a bad offense, and he will not be the starter to start the year. I think at some point, Jaylen Warren will not be able to handle a 3-down back workload, and Caleb Johnson slowly gets more involved as the season goes along. And I think Caleb Johnson's a good back, but what I've seen in the preseason has not been promising. He doesn't look that much more explosive than Najee so far, and the offensive line is garbage, and the play calling is garbage. So realistically, guys, expectations were just way too high on Caleb from the beginning, and I've been trying to warn people about it all offseason. But you get it now. And I don't think I'm going to have much pushback for having Caleb Johnson at 37, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Tank Bigsby at 38 and Braylon Allen at 39. Now, with Tank Bigsby, again, I would not be surprised if one of these backs is off of the team come week 1. Now, if in the case these backs are all there, I think Tank Bigsby still is involved. I think that he could be a first and second down guy and a red zone carrier as well. I think that Tank Bigsby does have a role in this offense. But at the same time, I don't think he's as good of a player as Travis Etienne is. That's why I've got Etienne in a tier above him, because I think if it comes down to it, and these guys are head-to-head, Travis Etienne will be the better player in fantasy than Tank Bigsby is. And then Braylon Allen at 39. Braylon Allen is a guy where you have to acknowledge him at this point as being a worthy fantasy rosterable guy. And he's being drafted pretty low. So, this is a steal. In my opinion, it's been proven time and time again that this offense has full plans to utilize a 2 or 3-headed running back system. Braylon Allen's the RB2 for sure. And listen, the Jets' offensive line actually did improve this offseason. So I think that there could be some good weeks from the running backs here. And I think Braylon Allen, the way he's looked, could be a really good back in flex situations. And if Breece goes down and he has to shoulder more workload, I think that could be a positive for him. And then Dylan Sampson at 40 to round us out. He is here because I believe at some point they will want to use him instead of Jerome Ford. This team has said nothing this offseason to indicate that they want Jerome Ford to be the lead back. Right now, I think they're kind of trapped to make him do that because I don't think they've seen enough from Sampson yet to make him that guy. But at the same time, I think that Dylan Sampson will get work to a certain extent during the back half of the season that will make him a top 40 guy. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 40 wide receiver rankings for 2025, click on this video right here.